Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome today on behalf of the Alumni Association. We are very grateful to have Dr. Sanjay Goel today with us. I do want to ask if anybody has any questions today to please put them in the Q&A, and we will get to them hopefully at the end of the presentation. Dr. Sanjay Goel is an associate professor in the Information Technology Management Department, School of Business at the University of Albany. He's also the director of research at the New York State Center for Information Forensics and Assurance at the university. Before joining the university, he worked at General Electric Global Research Center. Dr. Goel received his PhD in mechanical engineering in 1999 from Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute. Dr. Goel teaches several classes, including computer networking and security, information security risk analysis, security policies, enterprise application development, database design, and Java language programming. Thank you, Dr. Goel, for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
So good afternoon, everyone. And I'm certainly delighted to be talking to all of you, and thanks for joining this talk. And I want to a special thanks to our alumni for staying connected with you, Albany. We greatly benefit from your connection, and we have a lot of programs that involve our alumni. So thank you all. So my talk today is going to be focused on the future threats that we face. It'll be divided into 4 parts: our shifting adversaries, emergence of Internet of Things and cyber threats, artificial intelligence and cyber threats, and if we have time, I will talk about the human problems. So if we look at the last 2 decades, right, we have had a lot of cybersecurity problems. We see breaches happening at Target, at TJ Maxx, and then the OPM. So we have continued to have breach after breach. And we've been so mesmerized by all the breaches that have happened in the past that we are failing to look into the future and have lost perspective of some of the big challenges that we face today and into the future. Not only have new threats emerged, but our targets have emerged that the hackers are exploiting. So if you look at the fundamental mechanisms of attack, they stay the same, right? We find weaknesses in the infrastructure, we exploit those weaknesses, and then we launch our attacks to basically damage things, steal things, and whatever we need to do. So I want to give you a perspective of what has happened in the last 2 years, or last 20 years, and why the landscape is changing. First of all, over the last 20 years, the penetration of the internet has expanded significantly. From 2000, we had 500 million internet users, and today we have 5 billion. This is more than 2/3 of the world population is on the internet. And since its inception in 1996, social media has managed to infiltrate about half of the 7.7 billion people in the world. And if you look at our capacity to deliver information, about 1/3 of the developed world today uses broadband access, and that is greatly expanded in all of these. So what are the implications of that? So as more people use the internet, and as our broadband capacity increases, we are giving hackers more targets to attack. So that's why we are even more vulnerable. Second thing is our technology is advancing, which means we are using more and more applications. Each of them have vulnerabilities. So the sources of vulnerabilities have increased, which is greatly enhancing the threat landscape. So we need to note that security has always lagged behind technology evolution, as we have discovered with the internet, right? So far, we have seen 3 distinct generations of the internet. The first one was the internet as a communication platform, which came in with email and whatnot. And then we had the web. The second generation was the internet web, where we had all the e-commerce proliferate. The most recent evolution of the internet has been the social media, and about half the world is on social media today. And each of them have brought in new threats. And the internet is on the move again. And from the internet, which used to collect computers, We are moving into an internet that is connecting machines today. And not only can the internet think and communicate, internet can now also feel. The internet has billions of sensors which are being added to the internet for that sensory perception. And that is the Internet of Things. So we're going to talk about two technology evolutions, the internet as a platform physically connected devices, the IoT, and the artificial intelligence and machine learning evolution that is basically shaping up the internet. And so let's talk about the first thing. The first thing of note is that our adversaries are changing, right? If you look at all of these faces, which out of these do you think is a hacker, right? Each one of them is a hacker. These were some of the prominent hackers which were around over the last 20, 25 years who basically started the whole hacking business. They did hacking for fun. And what do we have today? Today, we don't have any face that we can recognize. We just have nameless, faceless adversaries. We have crime syndicates, which are becoming more sophisticated and mature. They're migrating their activities online. They're mimicking private sector management. Some of the advanced software they write for hacking is, is more sophisticated than some of the applications that we write. And they're operating from areas with weak and corrupt law enforcement. It's very hard to reach to them. And there was a recent test done where some fake data was left unattended to see, if that data would infiltrate. It had things like credit card numbers and whatnot. And so the fake data basically traveled to 22 different countries and five of the world's seven continents within a week. And so this is how hackers work today. The crime syndicate, they're extremely efficient in finding any data and exploiting it. The next is the hacktivists, right? The people who are ideologically trying to push their point forward, like the anonymous, right? Or the unnamed hackers which hacked into Sony, who were unhappy with Sony's policies and they they basically hacked into the system, released their movies and whatnot, and their private email embarrassing Sony. Then we have non-state actors, basically fringe groups who basically launched a massive espionage campaign across 69 countries. Nobody knows who the culprit behind this really was. And the operation is called Red October, and it happened almost a decade and a half ago. And then we have terrorists who are using their activities across the internet to be coordinated through the internet, by using hidden messages and whatnot. They're spreading their propaganda. And their goal is to destroy or incapacitate in critical infrastructure and threaten national security, basically get a name for themselves. And again, we have insiders. So from the friendly faces that we saw who were doing this for fun, now we have very serious people who are launching these attacks. So that is one of the biggest changes that we have seen in the threat landscape. And today, there is a marketplace for hacking. For everything you need, there's a price, right? You can basically rent a bot. You can find somebody to write hacking code for them. You can have somebody basically do user obfuscation, launch denial of service attack, and you can buy credit cards off of this dark web. So all of these services now available. So the adversaries that we were facing, individuals, have transformed into basically corporation and organizations. And the most important of these adversaries is the nation states. If you look at what's happening today, each and every nation state has a part of its military doctrine to use cyber as a weapon. And they're making rapid acquisitions of talent to join their cyber armies. And billions of dollars are being spent in developing weapons which they can exploit. Obviously, the key operators still are the same, Russia, China, Iran, and the US, and they're all in the running. Obviously, US has a clear leadership position. I mean, their cyber offensive capability is unmatched by anybody else, even though they don't use it often, but they have the capability. But we are definitely are victims of a lot of cyber attacks, as I will discuss going further. So we have three main cyber adversaries: China, Iran, and Russia. And they all have different motives. If you look at China, the main issue of China is basically espionage. to identify dissident activity and get information on them. And second, intellectual property theft. So these are the two things. They're desperately trying to win the technology race with the US. And a lot of their attacks have been in technology companies to basically gain knowledge and expertise. So this was an Operation Aurora, which was launched about more than a decade ago. And they basically, it was espionage against high-tech firms like Adobe, Akamai, Northrop Grumman, Morgan Stanley. And again, the same thing. They find a vulnerability, they have a backdoor, and then they basically steal information, right? The next thing was the APT-1, which China launched, which basically started the whole advanced persistent threat business. Again, their companies they targeted including technology, aerospace, public administration, satellites, telecommunications, scientific research and consulting. Again, same business. And more recent hack, which was attributed to China, was basically the OPM hack, where they went to the Office of Public Management and patiently worked on their attack, and they stole credentials of a lot of people who had submitted their credentials for for review. And again, a lot of people after that were basically not able to travel because their identities were revealed. So the second adversary is China. The main game that China has is retaliatory. It's basically trying to basically fight against what it believes is injustice is being done to them, for like the destruction of their nuclear reactors or sanctions against them. So this is their way to retaliate and fight back. And basically, in this attack, they use Operation Cleaver as a revenge attack. They use SQL injection and whatnot. Again, attacking firms, not stealing anything, just attacking for destruction. And our third major adversary in cyber is Russia. The game plan of Russia is different. They are primarily doing this for strategic influence in the world. They're trying to basically gain knowledge for political destabilization. Like the DNC hack, for instance, was meant to tilt the outcome of the election in a certain way. How much they were able to do is not clear, but they were certainly able to steal a lot of information which they leveraged and used used in the elections. The second attack which they launched was basically not Petya. It was an attack on critical infrastructure, primarily meant for Ukraine, with which they were on war, but it slid through and it affected countries all over the world. It was probably the largest loss grossing attack. And the more recent one was the solar winds attack. What they did in solar winds attack is they basically infiltrated the supply chain. Now, solar winds, they basically have a software called Orion, which is used for network management by organizations all around the world, including the US government, military, and whatnot. What they did, and 425 out of the 500 firms use the same software. They basically infiltrated solar winds, embedded their Trojan into the SolarWinds software. And when the update went out, each and every organization that used Orion was basically vulnerable to the attacks. So that's how the SolarWinds attack was launched. And again, the same approach: find a vulnerability, introduce malware, and propagate the malware. But the stakes are much higher, and the hackers are getting much more sophisticated. Okay, so let us look at the second technological revolution, what's happening, right? Internet has gone from basically saying things to doing things. It has gone from a network of thinking machines to a network of doing machines, right? So let's take a few examples of what we are seeing to see what the stakes are. So first of all, if you look at the Internet of Things, we have gone for 100,000 nodes about a decade ago to about 50 billion different devices on the internet. That's a huge growth. And if you look at the curve, it's not slowing down, it's exponentially growing, and we will see a lot of growth. If you look at the three major innovations that are going to shape the next few decades, is basically self-driving vehicles. One, second will be the smart grid, and the third is going to be implantable and wearable medical devices, and they're all being driven by the Internet of Things. So the stakes are high, right? So we don't even think of these things, but if you look at the farming today, There's a lot of things the farmer has to do, like check the weather, right, and basically figure out when to plant crops and whatnot. All that can become precision with sensors in the ground, with the UAVs, which are constantly monitoring things. We have weather stations providing data. We have Doppler weather forecasts, and we can have the right amount of water being released based on the moisture sensors. So in the future, our agriculture will be vulnerable to cyber attacks. Let's go next. So if you look what is happening in our grid today, right, our grid is vulnerable. So after the last few blackouts that we had, we have decided to modernize our grid and make it all ID compatible so that we have sensors throughout the grid, we have synchrophasers, we have automatic reclosers so that it has self-healing ability. And most important thing, we have smart meters. What the smart meters allow is not only to get electricity from the grid, but also to supply electricity. So in the future, you can imagine yourself going home, sitting on an exercise bike, and actually generating electricity, feeding it back into the grid, right? Or having your own solar panel or a windmill providing electricity back to the grid. And we need these micro energy sources to be able to fulfill our dream of about 70% use of renewable energy. But what it also does, it leaves our grid vulnerable to attacks because what we have done is we basically superimposed on our electric grid an information grid, which is constantly collecting data from it and providing it both for balancing the grid as well as for providing its self-healing and healing ability. So that's another area where we're seeing a lot of growth. Third thing is the smart cities where everything is interconnected from your locks to everything else. And from your air conditioners to whatnot, we will have complete compatibility with electronics. You'll be able to talk to your refrigerator, your oven, and whatnot in the future. So that's again in the offing. But more importantly, what we are looking at is medical devices. Today, you have a Fitbit that is giving you the number of steps you take. It can monitor your heartbeats and so how much you sleep. They are developing such wearable devices that will be able to analyze all the data that you are producing through this Fitbit, through the sensor they have, and be able to predict a heart attack before it actually happens. Right? So these are the kind of advances. There'll be insulin pumps, which will be able to monitor the levels of glucose in your blood and be able to release dosed insulin levels. Or we'll have defibrillators, which will be more precise and controllable wirelessly. So all of these things also raise some concern, right? You can have the cameras for the blind, for instance, right, that they can be able to see. Today, we are seeing ransomware attacks, right, where people are sabotaging pipelines or stopping pipeline flow, or they're basically taking your information. Tomorrow, they may be able to break into your heart defibrillators, or they may be able to break into your Fitbits and rapidly predict heart attacks for a million people around in the United States. So everybody's running to the hospital, creating a panic situation. So these are the possibilities in the future that as we are more and more reliant on this Internet of Things, we have uh, much more vulnerability to hackers and the kind of things which they can do. Another thing to note is that we have gone through many industrial revolutions, right? First was the mechanical loom when we started using machines. The second was when we had energy and we started the assembly line. The third revolution was when we had a lot of electronics and we have monitoring systems. And again, the industry is on the move again, right? The next industrial revolution is coming through AI and robotics, where a lot of the industry or manufacturing will rely on robots, very few people involved. So why is that so important and why is that so critical that every country in the world is in the race to get there? Because today, a lot of the migration of the work to low cost producing countries is based on labor. If everything is automated, there is very little need for labor. So there is no need for migration of work. So countries which had transferred off all of their manufacturing can restart their manufacturing operations. And so the countries are in a race, especially China and the US are neck to neck in trying to see who is going to lead the AI revolution. So now that we've seen what is happening, let me give you a preview of some of the attacks that have happened recently. regarding IoT. The most important one was obviously the Stuxnet attack, where camouflaged in a thumb drive of inspectors was a malware which reprogrammed the centrifuges in such a way that they constantly changed the RPM, and they basically destroyed a lot of the centrifuges in the Natanz nuclear reactor, much to the chagrin of the Iranians, right? And the perpetrators behind it. I don't need to name that. The second was a Mirai botnet. It took down basically multi-million-dollar sites. They used, in fact, infiltrated smart devices and used that to launch flooding attacks, basically bringing down sites all over the world. You can see from this map, almost every part of the globe which was connected was affected. Another attack came on a German steel mill, where using social engineering and spear phishing, the hackers got initial access to the mill. And then they basically manipulated the software for the furnace and prevented it from shutting down and cooling off. As a result of that, the entire furnace melted. And again, it could have blown up the whole factory with the consequences of that. And more recently, there was a skirmish between India and China. And, and while the skirmish was going on, it is suspected that Chinese hackers infiltrated into the India power grid. And 4 months later, there was a complete power shutdown in Mumbai, the industrial capital or the economic capital of India, with everything down, including the trains, stock markets, and whatnot. Again, it is suspected to be a cyber attack and suspected to be the Chinese hackers behind it. And more recently, the Colonial Pipeline, much closer to home. So where a Russian-based hacker group, DarkSide, compromised Colonial's financial systems with ransomware. And not knowing what the vulnerability they had on their industrial control side, Colonial shut down all of its operation, fearing that hackers could spread the malware to its industrial operation. And they had to pay $4.4 million in ransom to get their data unencrypted and cleaned up. Again, the consequences we see are enormous here. And so given all of that, in addition to that, what we're seeing is basically a proliferation of AI, which is going to further tilt the balance toward the hackers in what they can do. Right? Not only can they use AI to launch attacks, because much more sophisticated attacks, automated attacks, where they don't even need to monitor them, they can also exploit a lot of the weaknesses in AI. So this is just a slide I put in. A lot of people are very confused with what AI is. There's so many different definitions. So for me, what AI is basically an ability of a machine to be able to do things which it was not explicitly programmed. If you have an algorithm, if you're asking you to punch numbers, it does that. That's not AI. AI is being able to unilaterally make those decisions. For instance, in speech recognition, we don't tell it to recognize a specific speech, it just recognizes it, right? Or machine vision, or being able to respond to questions. So some of the good AI tools really are the Alexas and the Series of the world. And so that's what AI is. So, but let's see what the implications are. So AI systems are coming everywhere, right? If you look at AI, we are looking at AI systems which can basically do admissions now. They can decide on your credit worthiness and whatnot. But the key challenge with these AI systems is how accurate they are. I mean, there are systematic biases that we can introduce in these AI systems if they are not checked properly. For instance, if you look at the admissions of a university, right? If typically they have admitted only white males to the university and they use that data to train their admission system, what will it decide? That it wants to basically admit a white male with a specific characteristic in terms of the GPA and whatnot, right? And the same thing, and the data sampling can be flawed where groups are over or underrepresented. For instance, facial analysis technologies had much higher rates for minorities, particularly minority women, due to their underrepresentation in the training data. So this is one of the key challenges that we're facing today with AI. The second is the adversarial input attacks, right? So what happens in this case is that just like hackers are constantly probing our networks for vulnerabilities to exploit, they are similarly probing the AI system for weaknesses. right? And by giving bits of data, they can fool the system into something else. For instance, if there's an automatic vehicle, an autonomous vehicle looking at a stop sign, it should stop, right? By putting a few small pieces of green tape on there, it can fool the autonomous vehicle to believe that it's basically a green signal to go. You can basically paint a tank like a school bus in an attempt to fool a UAV or unmanaged aerial vehicle, right? In an example, researchers they took an image of a panda, right, and it was recognized well by AI, added some noise to the image, and later it still looks like a panda, but it was recognized as a gibbon. So again, we are facing these issues. The third thing is a poisoning attack, right? So AI learns from data. If you poison the data that AI is learning from, you can basically damage the entire AI system, right? And for instance, if a skin cancer detection algorithm thought every skin image that contained ruler markers were indicative of melanoma, since the images for cancer all had rulings in them. And so a lot of different ways in which bad data can be used to poison the AI system. Again, these are security issues that we need to face for the future. Another threat that is coming from AI is deepfakes. With, with AI techniques, we have the possibility now of generating basically real looking images of people by taking camera angle shots from various angles and sampling them so that they can take anybody's image and superpose it on somebody else. For instance, in this case, they can take this woman and superpose a man's face on it, right? If you look at the bottom, there's a person talking, right? And then we have the image of Putin. So we can make a talking Putin head by taking that image and implanting it over the person who's speaking. So we have that advanced technology. Initially, it was used for it's basically like putting a small veneer on top of somebody's face, anybody's face you want. Initially, it was used to swap celebrity faces on pornography images, but now it is used as a state tool for propaganda, making politicians, talk about things which they didn't talk about. The other thing that's happening is social bots, right? Social bots are basically computers that can communicate on social media. And Cambridge Analytica harvested information of 50 million Facebook users and targeted social media to spread election misinformation. And so we have created social bots, which basically talk like normal people within a limited range. And again, that's a threat posed by AI. Now combining, sorry. And so the other thing that's happening is that our privacy is in threat. Why is it in threat? If you look at every large city, they have millions of cameras all over to surveil people. It was okay in the past because those were only used when necessary when a crime happened. But now with AI, we are able to scan and process those images very fast so that you can on a continuous basis recognize people, faces, and features, which means your privacy is gone. Somebody can know precisely where you were, when you were, and how long you were, and what you were doing at any given time. Again, an issue of privacy. We need some rules against these kind of things. The thing that is much closer to my heart is about the lethal drones and the robots. So what's happening is we have had unmanned aerial vehicles as killer drones for a long time, right? But in the past, there was always a human in the loop pressing the kill switch. Tell you what, with this new AI, all the new AI techniques and facial recognition, the drones are being built, which will automatically recognize, facial features of army combatants and make the kill decision. So for the first time in the history of humankind, we are giving the life and death decision of a human being to a machine. I think this is a real moral dilemma. I mean, do we advance technology to do that? At what point do we stop when we do that? Because think of the consequences if we can do that, right? Anybody can program a drone, a killer drone, to recognize features of a specific identity. Let's say blacks, Hispanics, let's say Asians, and just go run around killing, shooting people. It can be used for specific assassinations, whereby we basically program an image of a politician you want to assassinate. and it goes around its business. If it spots it, boom, there goes the. So there are a lot of issues, security threats that we continue to face with this. But more important evolution that is happening is that we're combining the social bot technology, image, and the voice recognition and speech communication technology, along with the technology of deep fakes to basically create realistic humans. There are a lot of commercial firms today that can create realistic humans. They can look like me, like anybody else, an older person, younger person, more attractive, less attractive, and nobody can distinguish them from any real human being. So, what are the long term implications of that? First, they will find more and more use in the workplace. And second, they can be used to launch attacks, they can be used to infiltrate into groups. Given that everybody is operating through Zoom, if somebody were to replace me with a robot or with a digital human and join a meeting, people will recognize me as who I am, and all the secrets will be revealed. Phishing scams will be much different. If I'm asking for money from somebody, right, it'll be a lot different than somebody sending an email and people reading and interpreting it. If you look at the bottom picture on the right, this girl is called Lil Mikula, and she's a digital influencer, right? And she's not a real person. She has 1.5 million followers who follow everything which she says, and but she's created out of motion graphics, right? So these are the challenges that we're facing going forward. And so, so that's where what I wanted to talk about the future. So then let's go further to what else is happening, right? So right now, all of the attacks that we have seen, a lot of those attacks have been, we have studied them well. We know how to respond to them. We know how to protect them, ourselves from them. The problem that we're having today is human vulnerabilities, that we are not able to control human behavior. So humans are becoming a huge vulnerability in this whole chain of events. And right, because humans have cognitive limitations, they have competing priorities, apathy, and so that's where we are seeing a lot of these issues come in. So if you go through what's happening right now, right, we make a whole bunch of mistakes, right? Because we are so busy with so many different things. I mean, each one of us is working on many things. Right in the middle of working on a project, if something pops up, we just press on the button and let it go. What happens in that case? You might be loading a malware on your machine, right? If you have cognitive limitations, right? And when we multitask, our performance goes down. So a lot of people are avoiding working on security tasks because they have competing priorities. A recent research shows that when people have competing priorities, they tend to focus on the task at hand, which is actually going to give them some real benefits, right? Okay, and the most important thing that's going on is, right, the motivation. Why are humans not motivated to actually do security tasks? Let's look at it this way. Security tasks don't have any financial gain, right? They are not joyful tasks that somebody would like to do, like going for a run and feeling exhilarated. It's basically boring, dull tasks which take your time away. So there is no intrinsic motivation. So the only motivation then we have is extrinsic. So there are only two ways we can motivate people to do that. One is basically threats and punishments, and the other is giving incentives. And so I think that's where the challenge is, that most of the people are being focused is on training people, and but people are not motivated to do anything even if they're trained. So what we are looking at is how do we change this balance between motivation and performance for security behavior. And so what are we doing today? I'm just going to take 3 more minutes, Carmelina, then I will open up for questions, right? So we're doing two things. We're constraining people, right? We're restricting access to external websites, restricting access to software, controlling the perimeter, and frustrating the employees. The second thing we are doing is training, training, training. No matter how much people know, we continue to train them, overtrain them, and people are frustrated. They are not motivated. They sit through these meetings as if they are being punished for 3 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour. They don't want to be there. The third thing we are doing is threatening them. If you don't do this, we'll take this privilege away. If you don't do this, right, there'll be sanctions against you. You'll be reprimanded. And these are not working. as is literature says, threats only work for so long. And so what's happening is people are seeing security fatigue today. That a lot of people, they just don't want to hear about security. They don't want to train about security. They don't want to worry about it, right? And so that's where we are today in terms of, so that's why even though the technology we have has advanced, we understand how to control ourselves in terms of protecting from security breaches, but the humans have become a big impediment to this security breach. So that's the key challenge we have. And so what should we do? I'm not going to go through these slides, but I'm just going to talk to you briefly. What we need to do is we need to change the way we think about security. Instead of blaming the humans, we need to equip the humans in how they can do security. We need to incentivize people on how to do security. We need to assume that breaches are going to happen and that we just need to be able to quickly detect them. So we need to change the whole mode of the way cybersecurity works. And we also need to basically spend more energy in understanding where the threats are coming from in the future rather than just looking at in the past. And we need to engage our adversary better in terms of active defense because the stakes are much higher. And with that, I think I would like to close my talk and open up for any questions. I can go on for another hour and a half, but Carmelina threatened me that she'll shut me off if I go beyond 30 minutes. So I'll stop.
Well, very interesting and frightening at the same time. I have a question. What is like one or two things that we individually can do to protect ourselves? I read an article the other day about how somebody was using a toothpaste at someone at his mom's house, and he never said the name of the toothpaste. He never looked it up, but somehow they found out where he shops, and all like through all these algorithms now started to show ads about this toothpaste. And I know we are always trying to unfollow ads or not follow this, but it seems like no matter what we do, someone's always following us. What are just one or two things that we might be able to personally do to help protect ourselves?
Okay, so there are two things there, right? Protecting your security and protecting your privacy.
Mm-hmm.
Protecting your security, there's just a few simple things. Make sure you have a secure password, one. Second thing you need to do is that not only do you need a secure password, but you also need to have a good backup of all of your critical data. Any ransomware is absolutely useless if you are completely backed up. You can have ransomware, you delete everything and start from scratch. So these are two things if somebody can do, I think that eliminates a lot of the huge stresses that we see today. And the third important thing is not clicking on links. A lot of the malware that we are seeing today is basically because of the links that we click. They all sound attractive. We're looking for information on the web, in our emails and whatnot, and we are so programmed to clicking on links that sometimes we don't even think about it. So having a strong password, not clicking on those malicious links, and third, having a good backup. If there are three things you can do, you can eliminate most of your issues. I mean, there are always 100 more things you can do, but three important. And as for privacy, that goes, we are being tracked on every website that we go, right? So that's what happens. They don't know your identity. That is not revealed. But if you shop for something, they know your IP address. Mm-hmm. And they're going to send you basically messages and ads based on what you're looking for on the internet. That has become very common. So these are called sticky ads in some ways. So if you shop for something, you will see a lot of ads because that information is harvested and it goes onto your browser. So the one thing to do is clean up your cookies, make sure that you're using anonymous browsers. Otherwise, I think you need to just live with a little bit of a privacy breach. That's what
I think we're all becoming a little more accustomed to that, right? We're like, I looked for those pair of shoes and now all of a sudden I'm getting all the ads. And I think we're starting to get a little numb to that personally.
Yeah, it's just so common. And but this is big business now.
I don't have any other questions yet, but you have another question. Recently, my daughter's local school, she goes to Gilderland, they hacked the program, and with all of us being online all the time, these hackers seem to be taking advantage of it. But I question, like, why are they doing this? Like, what type of information could they possibly gathered from our, obviously pertinent information, but it didn't sound like they got any information. They just closed down the internet. Like, what is the motivation for some of these hackers that isn't a financial motivation?
They're meant to have, like I said, we are facing many adversaries, right? For some of the hackers, the primary goal is financial. For the other hackers, they're just trying to test their system to see what they can infiltrate, what they can break. And so some people are just trying out their skill set to see what things work and what don't work. And sometimes they're launching an attack and with a motive to do something, but they're not able to do it. So when they launch this attack here, so they have these random tools which are trying to find vulnerabilities. If they find vulnerabilities, they just find them, and just for the heck of it, they decide they don't have anything valuable, might as well shut it down just out of spite or something.
Well, yeah, right. And then for 2 days, like, everyone's online, they're taking classes, we're all online now, right? It just seems like we're very vulnerable now.
Right. I think a lot of this is going on.
Okay, looks like we just got a question. Is using a VPN a viable solution to protect privacy?
So depending on what you're trying to protect, right? I mean, what VPN does is it encrypts your end-to-end traffic. If you're using a VPN for work, it will not let anybody steal information in transmittal from your home to work and vice versa. However, you are still vulnerable to the information that you have open on your computer if somebody were to hack into your computer. So VPN does a limited thing, which is just secure the channel of communication between the work and your computer. But other than that, it is not protecting your privacy or security. You still need other hygiene measures in your own home computer, your home network to protect yourself.
Well, that looks like all our questions. Thank you so much, Dr. Goel. I really appreciate you joining us today. And then I do want to let you know that this will live on our YouTube channel once we have it saved. So you'll be able to reference it and share it with others as well. Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.